A European writer by the name of Gerald Massey said in one of his books that Stonehenge was built by an African man named Mauryan. Now, this is from a European writer, because a lot of times when Black historians say something like this, it's written off as being Afrocentric. But European writers and several other European writers say that African people built Stonehenge and other monuments up in Europe.
Only when the enslavement of Africans started to produce wealth for Europe that this notion of color racism began to become a reality. Most of the great saints of Europe are Black. Almost every church in Europe have a Black Madonna and child.
Saint Calogero was another patron saint of Italy. He was a Black man, and there's Black statues of this man all over Italy, and there's paintings of Saint Calogero all over Italy and Sicily. They worship this man in Sicily. They still have statues of many Moors up in Europe today. They have a statue of Saint Benedict that was made in the 1700s. There's another bust carving of Saint Gregory that's in a museum in Germany. So there's statues of Moors and African people all over Europe to this day that you can see, but you got to go to museums to see them. They're very quiet about them. You have to go over there, and also you have to learn about these things in different languages, because they keep that history hidden because they'll put it in another language. The Ivory Bangle lady was an African woman whose tomb they found up in the York area of Britain. Now, whenever they find African people in Britain, what they would normally do is just try to write them off as being slaves, or they might have been a slave. It's a possibility that they were slaves. But with the Ivory Bangle lady, they couldn't write her off as a slave because it showed that she had so much wealth, she could not have possibly been a slave. The way her tomb was made, it was made out of stone, which showed wealth. Inside the tomb, it had all types of artifacts and jewelry, like ivory bangles and necklaces and bracelets on her wrists. And it showed that this woman was extremely wealthy. Johannes Morris was a 13th century high-ranking official in Italy. And there's a carving, a statue of him at a museum in Italy right now. And this statue of Johannes Morris shows his clearly African features: African nose, African lips, African hair.
Look at the countries that are falling. Almost by chronology, they're falling the same way they invaded Africa. Greece is falling, Italy is falling, Spain is falling, Persia is falling. And it's all because what goes around comes around. No hocus pocus, no mumbo jumbo, this is just the way it is. You shall reap what you sow. That's not a biblical term, that's a scientific term.
When you read the European philosophers, what did they say? They often said that Africa had two great civilizations, Egypt in the north and Asia in the south. The white man said this. So they often, in ancient times, Asia was considered a part of Africa, or Africa's second civilization. They said that you go to Asia and it's nothing but a carbon copy of Africa because it was settled by the Africans.
A lot of people don't know that there are pyramids all over Asia, and there are pyramids in China. In Japan, they have an underwater pyramid that a lot of people don't know about, and you can go there now, and that's one of those ancient mysteries. But again, pyramids are all over the planet.
So in Asia today, you have pockets of Black people. You have the Mani. You have in southern Thailand, you have a related group in northern Malaysia, sometimes called Sakai, S-E-K-A-I. You have the Andaman Islanders, and there are at least two groups. One group is called the Onge, O-N-G-E, or O-N-J-E, I think it's O-N-G-E, and another is called the Jarawa, J-A-R-A-W-A. And then you have Black populations in the Philippines, sometimes called Negritos, or Eta, or I think we should call them Acta, which just means the people. You have a tradition of a similar group in Taiwan. These are the diminutive Africoids. These are the small Blacks, similar in many ways to the Twa, or so-called Pygmies in Central Africa. These are very, very ancient people who left Africa perhaps 60, 70, maybe 100,000 years ago and became isolated.
The Padang people, that's a group of people in Asia, and the women have these rings that they wear on their necks. that's identical to an African tribe of women in East Africa who wear the same type of rings on their necks. So this just shows that the African-Asian connection is still there. They still carry on some of the African cultures and traditions in certain parts of Asia.
I once had a professor of mine working on my doctorate tell me that she went to Japan and they went into the mountains of Japan. Now, this isn't a conscious woman by most definitions, but she couldn't wait to come back and tell me this. She said, Umar, I was in Japan. We went up into the spiritual temples of Japan, and we sat down in one of the temples waiting for the priest to come out and teach us a little bit about what they believe and what they stand for. She said, Umar, they walked out of the temples and their skin was just as black as ours. They had gray afros because they were elders. Now, she said the phenotype looked like the modern Asian, but she said the skin was black and they had gray afros, hair standing up on top like Don King. And she said it totally overcame me. They sat down and they began to talk. And she said, I couldn't believe these were black men. They were Japanese, but they were black men.
When I went over to Indonesia, I went there at night and I would see billboards of very light-skinned Asian Indonesian people. And then when I went to my hotel, I would go and watch these movies and I would see these very, again, light-skinned, pale-skinned Indonesian Asian people. But the next day when I went out into the streets of Indonesia, everybody was either my color or darker. I didn't see one person who looked like these people that were on the billboards and on television. So they would pick and choose and get the whitest looking Asian people to promote in the media over there. And when I walked around Indonesia, I saw people like jet black, dark. I ran into a couple of people with afros. I saw one Asian brother, full-blooded Asian guy with an afro, and I had to stop him. I said, brother, where are you from? And the brother was like, I'm from here, right here in Indonesia. So that African presence, that African phenotype is still throughout Asia to this day.
Look at the Buddha's hair. No Chinese person's hair looked like that. The Buddha has knotty hair. Every time you see the Buddha, his hair is knotted. Just a thought.
There's a painting called the Nambam painting of the Portuguese when they first go over to Japan. And when you look at this painting, the painting was made in around sometime in the 1500s, and it was the first eyewitness account of what they saw. Many of the Asian people there were dark-skinned, and half the people who were supposed to be Portuguese were dark-skinned.
There's a tradition begun by a man named Alexander Francis Chamberlain, at least in April 1914, in a publication called the Journal of Race Development. And I can quote him almost exactly. And he says, and even in far-off Japan, we can find traces of the ancient Negro. For when the Japanese armies in the 8th century, now here I'm paraphrasing, when the Japanese armies in the 8th century were fighting their traditional enemy, the Ainu, they were led by a famous Negro general named Sakanoye Tomomiraro. And this man became the first shogun in Japanese history.
Also in Malaysia, when I went down to Malaysia, I went into the rainforest over there. And it's very difficult to get over to some of these spots. Some of these people there are very secluded. And because they're secluded, they were able to avoid many natural disasters, and they were also able to avoid invasions. So they didn't mix in with some of the invading forces, so they kept their same African phenotype. And if you go to Malaysia, there's a tribe called the Batek tribe, and they look like an African tribe. If you go there, they have woolly hair, African nose, lips, everything about these people looks like an African tribe.
One of the things we know about white supremacy and light-skin supremacy, because even when you look at Asia, even when you go to East India, they practice racism. Why? Because all of these places were colonized by the European and their culture infected the people. So one of the things that they do is they also have a tendency to do what? Hide the darker brother.
As a matter of fact, there was an incident that happened with Miss Fiji. They had the Miss World competition, and they chose this woman to be Miss Fiji. And Miss Fiji has more Europeanized features. And the people of Fiji spoke out against her. They weren't really trying to hate on her, but they said, look, this woman doesn't represent us. She doesn't look like us. She doesn't have our nose. She doesn't have our hair. And we're very proud of what we look like, and we want somebody to represent us. Because again, they were trying to use that Europeanized Miss Fiji to bring in tourism and not scare away tourists. But the people spoke out against her. And this just shows that many people around the world, they're proud of their Africoid features. One of the oldest groups of people to inhabit India were a group of black-skinned people called the Dravidians, or the Untouchables. Now, when people think about the history and the culture of India, they oftentimes think of Mahatma Gandhi. And many people give praises and accolades to Mahatma Gandhi because of Dr. Martin Luther King. But what many people do not know is that Gandhi had very racist views towards black people.
The truth behind Mahatma Gandhi. First of all, I'm reluctant to use the word Mahatma. Mahatma means great soul. And many of my Indian colleagues would say he wasn't even an ordinary soul, much less a great soul.
The late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. put that picture of Mahatma Gandhi up in his office and said that he got the operational technique for nonviolence from Mahatma Gandhi. It was somewhat premature for the ancestor, who's one of my favorites, but it was premature because now you automatically set the stage where African people would start looking to Mahatma Gandhi also. For example, last spring, last Black History Month, I was in Atlanta. I went to the Dr. Martin Luther King Shrine where he and Queen Mother Coretta are buried, and across the street is a museum. Outside the museum is a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. I couldn't believe it. This is a museum dedicated to the honor of Dr. King. But there's no statue of Dr. King outside of a museum erected in his honor. Instead, you have a life-size statue of Mahatma Gandhi. So the message to the child is what? That it was really Mahatma Gandhi who's responsible for you coming through the civil rights struggle, not Dr. King. Now, had Dr. King knew Mahatma Gandhi's true racist thinking and ideology, I'm sure he would have thought otherwise. As a psychologist, you can never know what's really at the root of somebody's thinking. I would argue that we should never make a hero of any other people. Mahatma Gandhi turned his back on Africans. Even when he came back to India and began fighting, he refused to give support to the African emancipation movements. And on more than one occasion, he had made derogatory remarks about Africans. And we also know the Dravidians of India, the Africans of India who are oppressed, were oppressed, and have always been oppressed in India. There is no record anywhere of Mahatma Gandhi fighting against the oppression of Indians in India who were black, the so-called Dravidians. Why didn't he speak out for them? Why didn't he speak out for Africans who were fighting against colonialism? Why didn't Mahatma Gandhi help our brothers and sisters in South Africa? It's because he was a racist like the rest of them.
First of all, Australia itself is the world's second smallest continent, second only after Antarctica. It's the smallest inhabited continent. The name Australia means Great South Land. And the first people of Australia were the people we call Aboriginal Australians, commonly called blackfellas. And of course, you have different names, the Koori, the Goori, the Noongar, and various names.
The people of Australia, originally Australia was an African land. In fact, in European documentation, they considered it an African satellite. When the British came into Australia and began the mass extermination of African people, they were crystal clear who they were exterminating because they said it. And also we know that right off the coast of Australia was an island called Tasmania, a little island off the coast of Tasmania. There are no living Tasmanians in existence right now. You can't find a Tasmanian man, woman, or child because the British systematically exterminated the entire population.
It wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal people in Australia were considered humans for the first time. In January 1967, there was a national referendum to decide if Aboriginal Australians should have Australian citizenship. Up to that point, they were officially, and you can document this, classified as flora and fauna and plants and animals.
In Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people. You know, they would have these, they would take the children and take them to breeding camps and breeding farms and breed the darker ones and the mulatto ones with white, and they would literally breed the melanin out of these people. The movie Rabbit Proof Fence is about that breeding process, them breeding out the melanin of the Aboriginal people. So it was very deep what was going on over there.
You have three major island chains: North Pacific, West Pacific, and South Pacific. Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia. Melanesia is the South Pacific. That means the Black Islands. And the biggest island is New Guinea. Others include New Caledonia, New Ireland, New Britain, Fiji, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, which used to be known as New Hebrides. These are the Black Islands. And the people that I've encountered in this part of the world tend to say they come from Africa. People tend to have very, very Africoid features: dark skin, tightly curled hair, you know, large afros, we call them today. Many of them say they come from Africa, especially in Fiji. And also in Buka Island. And I ask people, where do you come from? We come from Africa. And they're very matter-of-fact about it. Buka, B-U-K, means black skin. And they have the reputation of being the blackest human beings on earth. So quite naturally, that was where I wanted to lay my head. Look at images of King Kamehameha, and I know you have, who is what might be considered the founder of Hawaii. It's like the founding father of Hawaii. Clearly Africoid.
One of the most famous Hawaiians is a guy named Duke Kahanamoku. Duke was one of the forefathers of modern surfing, and they would use Duke to promote tourism in Hawaii. They would send Duke to the continental United States to promote swimming in Hawaii and surfing, and Duke had problems getting into swimming areas when he came to the continental US because people thought that he was black because he was so dark. And many of the native Hawaiians, they have that dark African phenotype. If you go to places like Maui and some of the remote areas of Hawaii, they look like black people, just like Samoans. You go to Samoa, they look like black people over here in America.
I'm doing an interview, a call-in thing, and somebody called in and says, you know, I'm a Hawaiian. And he says, the problem was you just didn't meet the right people. I said, really? He says, when I was a young boy, my grandmother used to tell me that when Kamehameha was trying to unite the Hawaiian Islands, this is around 1815, that he ran into trouble and he sent back to Africa for reinforcements. He said that was a Hawaiian tradition.
African people, they've been coming to the Americas for years, thousands of years before Europeans. And this is why many Europeans knew how to get over to the Americas based on maps that African people left for centuries.
We wear the gene pool of the Native American population. We wear the gene pool of the African, which is called Moors, who had preceded Columbus to this country. And we wear the gene pool of those Africans who came from the continent. And so we felt that this land, and I do now still feel this land is ours. I'm an African American. Africa is my race. America is my geopolitical place. I'm not surrendering that to anybody.
One of the things we know is there are Europeans who wrote books about the African presence in America before Columbus. but it's difficult to actually get your hands on some of the copies of these books. They're real hard to find because it wasn't popular for white folk or black folk, but especially white scientists, to say that African folk, that Moorish people were in America prior to the European coming here.
There are 3 belts that leave the coast of Africa. There's one that's in the north, there's one in the middle, and there's one in the south. When you look at this middle one literally will take you right into the Gulf of Mexico, even if you didn't have power boat. And what's going to happen is the Africans are going to start to move into this area here, and they're going to begin to settle in this corner of the Gulf of Mexico. They're going to develop, according to what our research shows, 3 major cities: Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo, okay, and La Venta.
If you go to Mexico, southern Mexico now, especially in the provinces and towns in southwest Mexico, they'll tell you there's 2 black people there. The ones that came on the ship, meaning those who were enslaved, and the ones who came before the ship, meaning those like the Olmecs and others who had been here at a point where no one knows when that genesis was. They just were always here.
The Olmec problem was that European scientists, after finding it, it was found by a little farmer who was clearing the land for him to grow some maize and grow his corn. And he found what looked like an upside-down pot. And when he called the owner of the land over, they found out what it was, and he excavated it, and they found this gigantic head. Now, that was back early in 1837 or 1897 or something around that time. When they found that and they saw this Africoid face, that completely turned everything around, because they thought the Mayan civilization was the oldest civilization here. Now, when they found that the Mayan civilization was not the oldest civilization, and that Africans all through the histories were supposedly brought here as slaves, they did not want to fess up and change their whole curriculum to state that there was an African civilization in the Americas some 5,000, 10,000 years ago. The other part of it is that during the Reconstruction period after the Civil War, the Vatican put out an edict very quietly that all Western books and academia had to first be passed through the Vatican census. So the Vatican said that any evidence of black history here had to be taken off of the history book. This man, Coe, who essentially became the top man that you went to see about Mesoamerican civilization, he worked for the CIA.
When I was down there in Mexico, I saw one Olmec statue. It was very interesting to me. It had the face of an African person, and the name of the statue was actually called Monkey Looking in the Sky. And what they would do, they would try to pretend that a lot of these statues were actually animals. Like the Olmec heads, they would try to say that they were jaguars or they were aliens from outer space. The European archaeologists would try to make up anything to say that they were not black. But this one statue called Monkey Looking in the Sky is clearly not a monkey, because first of all, monkeys don't have full lips, and it looks like a person. It is a person. And this just goes to show the depths that these archaeologists will go to deny the African history.
One of the earliest groups that I can find archaeologically would be the Folsom people, F-O-L-S-O-M. That's why you go out, you look at your map, you find various areas that are called the Folsom areas, Folsom, Arizona, Folsom, Nevada. You go out in New Mexico, you find Folsom Prison, and you find one, and one of the biggest archaeological and oldest digs in America is called the Folsom Archaeological Findings out there, where they found all these African artifacts in the ground. And that was 16,000 years ago. 6,000 years ago, Asians began to migrate across the Bering Straits into the United States, and they came into the United States across the Bering Straits into Canada, then down to the northern part of the United States, and down into the southern part, and they interbred and met and interbred with blacks, those Folsom people. And otherwise, that's why American Indians never had slant eyes and were never yellow skinned. They became round-eyed and brown skin and red skin.
All over the country of Costa Rica, you have these little African-like statues just all over the place. And when you go to the museums, you see these African artifacts, African-style gold, a lot of monuments and artifacts that resemble monuments and artifacts from West Africa.
You have one part of the Mississippi River go one way, the other part goes the other way. In the Y of that split, you have a place that Native Americans call Cahokia. Today it's called Collinsville, Illinois. It's near St. Louis. This is where you have the largest pyramid in the Northern Hemisphere. It's called Monk's Mound.
If you look at pictures from the 1900s and beyond, most of the Native American people were very dark-skinned. Sometimes they were very jet black. But most Native American people before 1900, if you look at photos of them, they're extremely dark-skinned people, especially on the West Coast, like in California. The California Indians were very dark-skinned. The Indians that were around the Minnesota and Milwaukee area that we know as Milwaukee and Minnesota now, they were very dark-skinned people. The Native Americans on the East Coast were very dark-skinned people. In the late 1800s, there was something called the Dawes Rolls, which was basically a census that made records of people's ethnic backgrounds in order to determine which Native American tribes would get certain land allotments and other benefits. After slavery, many black people were associated with some of these tribes by bloodline, through marriage, through adoption, and even servitude. And because they were associated with these tribes, many black people were entitled to some of these benefits. The government did not want blacks to get these benefits, so they created a separate freedmen's list specifically for black people. They also started to list any full-blooded Native American who had African features as black because they didn't want them getting those benefits either. At the same time, they allowed white citizens to come in and pay money under the table to be listed as part Native American.
1895 and 1896, when a lot of the whites found out the benefits that these blacks are going to be entitled to, a lot of whites went to the Dawes Commission and say, look, why don't you put my name on there? They said, but you're not an Indian. So that's what they said, well, I'll give you $5. So then the rule got around, the policy got around that for $5, that a white could put his name on the Dawes Rolls and be called himself an Indian and be entitled to all these benefits, and all their children could be entitled to all these benefits forever. And so that became known as what's called a $5 Indian. And so if you go around now and check most of the Indians, the so-called Indians in America, about 90% of them are not even Indians. Those are just whites now who are passing as Indians. But they're getting all the benefits. And they're not paying any taxes, getting free college education. They put up a little reservation on the land that they don't live on. They have another home off and get all kind of benefits.
Iron Eyes Cody was another famous Native American person. He was in the media for years. In the 1970s, they utilized him for this pollution commercial. He was known as the Crying Indian. So he was a very well-known Native American in American culture. But the reality is, Iron Eyes Cody wasn't Native American at all. He was Sicilian. Both of his parents were from Sicily. So he didn't have one drop of Native American blood in him. He was another fake Indian. First authorized paintings from the Americas was of these 3 African men who were the leaders of a maroon colony down in Central America. And these men, the legend is that they were enslaved Africans who escaped, and they were shipwrecked, and they formed a maroon colony down in Central America, and they became leaders of the Native American tribes down in Central America. And this painting of these 3 African men, it's at a museum in Madrid, Spain today.
Boukman, Haitian Revolution, the original revolutionary, because he was turned in the night of the revolution. That's when Toussaint Louverture took over. The book Irritated Genie, we need to read. His name was Boukman. Boukman was called Boukman from Jamaica because he couldn't be handled in Jamaica. He was sold to Haiti. He started a rebellion amongst the African people. And they knew him as Boukman because they always read. He was very intelligent. He always taught the people who they were and what they were. The night before the revolution, Boukman looked to his brothers and sisters in the field, and he said, "You want to win? Cast aside your white God. Embrace your African spirit. You are free." He didn't say you will be free. He didn't say you can be free. He didn't say you could be free. He said, cast aside your white God. You are free.
Had it not been for the Haitian Revolution, America would be 50% of its current size, if not more. The Louisiana Purchase doubled America's size, and there would have never been a Louisiana Purchase if there had never been a Boukman Dada, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Toussaint L'Ouverture, because it was their victory over Napoleon's army that bankrupted the banks of France and forced them to sell its shares of land in America to this country.
Toussaint Louverture gave millions of dollars to a man named Stephen Girard. He was a European sea captain, and Toussaint Louverture gave him this money to get arms because they were going to set up a colony in Africa to fight slavery. And when Toussaint Louverture went to prison, Stephen Girard would not return the money to Toussaint Louverture and his descendants and his family. So Stephen Girard took the money, the millions of dollars that he got from Toussaint Louverture, came to America, started Girard College, and he really became the first American millionaire. And so a lot of people don't know that Girard College was founded on stolen money from Toussaint Louverture. Down in Peru, they found the mummified body of a Peruvian girl who was sacrificed about 500 years ago. And the Peruvian girl, if you look at her, her body's well preserved. She has African features, African facial features. She even has African style braids. And this Peruvian mummified girl is still on display. The HMS Challenger was a ship that went on an expedition in the 1870s. And they went to different places around the world. And one of the places they went to was a place down in South America called Terra del Fuego.